Hello, hi, and welcome into my last episode into the series and the world of Black musicals, their history, and hopefully at the end of the series, we can consider the question of what is a Black musical. Today we'll be talking about the forgotten but poignant musical called Passing Strange. And yes, I am in a different location, but just like this series, we keep pressing on and we don't worry about it. Since this is the final episode, I want to kind of change things up a little bit, especially because many may not be familiar with this musical. However, if you like to watch the filming of this musical, there is a film version done in 2008 by Spike Lee, which can be found on streaming platforms. I highly recommend that you watch it. It's how I watch the musical, and it's really great. Not often do we get to find actual film, legit recordings of musicals, and I hope that it's a trend that keeps happening because this is such an amazing story, and it deserves to be filmed. So I'm glad we got the chance to see it. So please check that out. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on, I think, ICF Films. But there is a recording if you'd like to watch it after this video. And I'm coming to you today in my best, authentic, and real self, whatever real means. This is what I think of myself as the real. And as Stu says in the musical, the real is both real and not real. It is art. And sometimes the realest things in life are art. So I think that that's really important to take from today. Now, I am going to go into kind of the background history of the show. However, I would like everybody to know that there really is not that much out there about this musical, unfortunately. Just interviews that I was able to piece together and kind of put together something. And again, this is why we kind of need more and more historical work on Black musicals, or else they will fade away and we will never know what they are nor what their background history is. So if anyone has any extra things to put about the behind the scenes of this musical or about the people who created it, please post it down below. I mean, this is an open and free series for us to conversate and to communicate and to talk. So what is Passing Strange? Well, Passing Strange is titled a comedy, drama, rock musical, although I would say it's a bit more complex than even that. It first premiered on Broadway February 28th, 2008 at the Palazzo Theater, but it had previous productions in Berkeley, California, off-Broadway, as well as the Sundance Institute Theater Lab. Its core plot is about a Black suburban middle-class American's boy's dream to escape the lingering sense of Blackness in America, which is tied to slavery, and he wants to find this real. The protagonist has such a strong desire to live in the real Europe as a songwriter that he rejects his past and his present. This show also has a narrator as well as an exposed band that tells the character's stories and the characters interact with them. The protagonist is also anonymous and only goes by the title A Youth by its narrators. However, his desire to escape and eventually move to Europe is kind of rooted in selfishness and isolation and pushing many away and maybe even causing white supremacy. What's also interesting about the show is that its leading Black cast plays both white and Black characters. While the actors have to be stellar in order to make this show work, it's the audience's sense of imagination and the constant breaking of the fourth wheel that really allows this musical to shine. The show only lasted, sadly, for 6 months, or rather 165 performances on Broadway, but when factoring in its many development runs, its off-Broadway term, it did fairly successful. It was so well received that Spike Lee felt as though it needed to be recorded because it was essential and a crown achievement of theater and needed to be seen by audiences, which is why we have that film version. Even when first researching Black musicals, the plot of the show really stuck out to me because it's so different and I knew I had to use it. I mean, you won't find many Broadway shows that tackle a nuanced Black middle-class experience in modern days without this kind of white gaze. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so let me go back a bit and talk about the workings of the show and who its creators are. Passing Strange was created by Stu, who said he was, quote, initially inspired by reading about the Old Globe Theater where Shakespeare productions were originally performed in front of rowdy audiences. Stu was also a longtime rock musician and performer who wanted to have a mix of the energy of a rock show with a live theater setting, but he had never created a show before like this. He had never even created a show, period. This is why the show's set, designed by David Corrins, showcases the orchestra as they constantly interact with characters, and I will just say now that the design is absolutely beautiful and captures the spirit and surrealism of Blackness without exploiting it for profit. Yet, The designer is white, and I would have loved to see someone else in the role, but at the same time, the set has nothing to do with authenticating blackness, nor does it have any encoding blackness in it, so it kind of works perfectly. In fact, the set is just in itself kind of this weird, real, nothing real imagination. I guess, let me backtrack. Basically, the set first starts out with bare. There's nothing. You just see the musicians, and then the actors kind of weave their way in between it. But then as the show goes on, especially in Act 2, the panels open and it exposes all of its amazing lighting work. So again, there's really no encoding blackness in this stage design. It's just what it is. So again, it works. Another way that the show's title came to fruition is that it comes from Shakespeare's 1603 play Othello, or The Moor of Venice, from the following lines, quote, "My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She swore in faith 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she'd not had heard it, yet she'd wished that heaven had made her such a man." That's a really gorgeous sum of words, and it should be noted that the choice of using Othello is no accident, as the show has parallels of Othello's themes. Othello itself relies on old stereotypes of Moors, people of African descent, and historically the role would have been played by a white person passing as a black man. Stu uses this idea for his musical as black performers both pass as being white and as they play white characters. At the same time, their black characters, the youth, are trying to come to terms with if authentic blackness really is anything. This is underlined with the question of, who are we really? Do black people perform for one another? And do they perform for white people? Does it even matter? What does passing do, and who gets to pass? Why is this important, and can we project our past, present, or future communities and identity with passing? Or does it enhance them? These questions are really interesting and complex, and I really appreciate that the show manages to do all of it without promoting past stereotypes with using blackface or minstrel performing or pandering to whiteness, unlike other shows do. We've discussed this in the past with shows like Jelly's Last Jam and even The Color Purple and Dreamgirls. Even in its ending, Passing Strange does not end happily, nor does it discuss black resilience in a way that is palatable to whiteness. It is not packaged in one neat box to be contained. It is both the real and the unreal. Nor does it try to suck out and define what blackness is for white or black audiences. Instead, what happens is deeply remorseful. It's time that cannot be returned back, and a longing for what was once considered passing for ghetto. If you'd like to learn more about this idea of passing for ghetto and how it kind of combines in Passing Strange, please check out another video analysis by the channel Notebook. I'll post the link below, but it's an incredible analysis series. It's like 4 parts. It's really great if you'd like to check it out. I'm not going to get too much into that because I think that it involves spoilers that I don't want to get into, but that video is really great, so I'll post that below. But let's get back to talking about the inner workings of the show itself. As mentioned, the show is also created by Stu, who also composed and orchestrated the music. He also plays the role of the narrator in the show itself, yet Heidi Rodenwall, a longtime partner and co-creator with Stu, co-composed the musical as well, and performs in the orchestra of the show. Annie Dorson was the director, along with William Isaac as the choreographer, David Corns on set design, Hope Clancy on costume design, and Kevin Adams on lighting design. One can also not separate Stu and Heidi Rodenwall's relationship and kind of creation and collaboration together because everything they do is so intrinsically tied to one another, and it makes sense because they do work really well together and they've still continued to go on to make many projects together. While I'd love to see more faces of color on the design team as representation off stage, it's just as important on stage. This is one of the few shows that uses a mix of creators for the better. Unlike the shows previously mentioned with white teams that we've discussed in episode 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, this show feels like it wants to be its own thing, both drenched in blackness while also allowing black people to be raw and human. Passing Strange showcases that maybe it's possible to have a black show with a mix of both black and white creatives working intrinsically together. Not to mention that Stu does strive to really bring the whole show together, and its entire core is about having people passing for what they are not. So it makes sense to have a mixture of faces and not an only Black creative team. The rest of the cast consisted of Deidre Aziza, Daniel Breaker, Eliza Davis, Coleman Domingo, Chad Goodrich, Rebecca Naomi Jones, as well as Christian Casson, Christian Gibbs, Heidi Rodenwall, and John Spurney in orchestrations. I'd also be remiss if I didn't talk about Passing Strange and its gorgeous collaboration and play on words. Most of the show is actually sung instead of talking and singing, almost making it an opera of sorts. Every song in the show relies on call and response, lyrics, riffing, and rock and blues techniques, which seem to build on each other until they explode and diffuse. It's quite amazing. In each song, there's also an allusion to Black culture, Black coding, Black resistance, and American figures, including various references to slavery and self-identity. I can't help but think that I'm biased, though, because I do quite enjoy rock-themed musicals. There's something about them that's just so different than the average Broadway musical, and I really like that. For instance, as the show starts and the band rises up from the stage, Stu sets up the scene stating, quote, "Now, since it's my job, I'm going to set the scene in a big 2-story Black middle-class dream, with all the mod cons, the manicured lawns, some saving bonds, a boy and his mom, talking mid-70s South Central LA, a colored paradise where palm trees sway, but this promised land wasn't delivering the goods, even in the best of all possible hoods," end quote. I mean, there's so much in just this one passage that can be unpacked, and I'm still amazed at both how Stu and Heidi did this. I mean, you won't find many Black musicals that talk about this specific thing, especially Black middle-class life. There's also such lines like this one, "So Roots blew your mind? You didn't know it was that bad? I learned that blank in the 3rd grade," end quote. However, even when characters speak, they deliver lines that are both poignant and hilarious. I mean, there is so many one-liners in this show that just add something special. Like, I would watch the show and I'd hear one line and just start laughing, and you could tell the audience really loved that. And I think the really cool thing about this show is that the songs and the lines are so specific, and they really rely on the actors being full-bodied and really having charisma in order to make it work. A few of my other favorite songs from the musical are the Church Blues Revelations, Keys, both versions, Come Down Now, and Amsterdam. I'll play a little clip from Come Down Now so you can kind of hear how distinct the music is. 'Cause I've been thinking about leaving my fingerprints on your beat. I've been thinking about leaving my fingerprints on your beat. Leaving my fingerprints on your beat. It's like church now. Again, this show has one of the most beautiful arrangements of music that I've ever heard on a Broadway show, which I think Broadway usually kind of dumbs down music to be more palatable and digestible. It also kind of relies on music being toe tapping and very Broadway-like, if you know what I mean. Yet Stu just relies on his own art to tell the story no matter who is watching, which I think is really interesting. I mean, whether the audience is Black or white, he just wants to make art. And I will say that in the filming, many Black audience members were kind of the first to get up and dance. You can kind of see them in the audience, as well as break the fourth wall, which I think is very particular to how Black people tell stories. And this was really encouraged. You can kind of tell as cast members often interacted with audience members, and how even Stu even kind of calls out. And even in the last act of the musical, it's just him talking to the audience. And so he's constantly breaking that fourth wall, which I think really helps with this musical and really helps in its charm and in developing an audience interaction and experience. Each individual audience member kind of gets to create their own thoughts on the show, and they get to have their own individual as well as collective experience. And I think that that's really cool, especially for Black audience members like myself, to find, one, you're not really going to find that many musicals about Black suburban life and about a Black kid who kind of wants to get away from it all. So I kind of already saw myself in the main character. But even still, there's so many other ways in which to identify with the music and to not identify at the same time, because so much surreal things are happening that it kind of takes you out. And I like that element. It kind of is always there to remind you, this is art. This is not a real thing. But is it real? And again, that kind of question of what the real is and what the real isn't is really central to this musical, as well as really central to the idea of what identity is and what is being Black. So now that we've kind of got the behind-the-scenes backstory out of the way, we've got to talk about what is the reception of this particular musical, as now it's kind of almost been forgotten in Broadway. And I don't want to say forgotten in a bad way, but I just mean that it's been kind of left behind. Hilton Als of The New Yorker kind of praised this musical in its beginning, saying that, quote, Passing Strange is a brilliant work about migration, a geographical migration, but also in its hero's migration beyond the tenets of Blackness and towards selfhood. Stu, who created Passing Strange, which is an autobiography of sorts, doesn't distract us with an ecstatism or nostalgia, end quote. Again, what makes this show so incredibly different from what we've seen on Broadway is that this show talks about the ways in which people do and do not get to pass for something else. Not just Black people, but people in general. For instance, the youth in the show cannot completely negate that he looks Black, but he can put on a Black mask and pretend to be different versions of Blackness. I mean, to a certain extent, isn't that what we do as Black people? We code switch and we put on different signifiers depending on where we are and who we want to be. I mean, I myself have tried my best to pass in white environments, but after a long time, it's kind of the question of who controls and determines who is passing, and is passing for white or Black? I mean, is passing something we can control, or does it begin to control us? I mean, at this point in my life, I really can't control how or when I code switch. It just happens. Not to mention that this is one of the few shows that really allows Black people to play actual white characters with no questioning of sorts. I mean, the only show I can really think to recently do that has been Hamilton, and I mean, Hamilton has its own kind of long history and complexity and, problematic history, but again, Hamilton is one of those few shows that doesn't bat an eye that people of color are playing these white people, white historical people. Same thing with Passing Strange. The Black cast gets to play white characters with no question, and I think that that's really interesting and really fun. The show itself was nominated for 7 Drama Desk Awards and won 3, which included Outstanding Musical, Outstanding Lyrics, and Outstanding Music. It was also nominated for 7 Tony Awards, but only won 1 for Best Book of a Musical. This was quite a shock to many because a lot of people thought that Passing Strange would have won more. I mean, it had gotten such great reviews and a lot of great press. However, In the Heights ended up taking a lot of wins that year. I'm going to read a quote so you can kind of understand what I mean. Quote, while In the Heights recouped its $10 million investment in 10 months, Passing Strange lost most of its $5 million investment. Its failure was a bitter blow to the Schubert organization. And they say, quote, I'll never know how close the Tony vote was or wasn't, but it will take me a long time to get over the loss, end quote. As we've discussed before, the Tonys don't and should not be an indicator of defined success of a musical, nor should it be an indicator of how amazing a musical is in terms of representation. The Tonys has had a long history of pandering, of racism, and not to mention that they don't often enjoy musicals that aren't easily digestible. I can't help but think that for the Tonys and for the Broadway community in general, In the Heights was just more palatable and something that white audiences could grip onto more. This is in by no way like shade to In the Heights. I think it does great representation as well, but I do think that it's just true that In the Heights is a bit more palatable and easier to sell to audiences. And I think that Passing Strange in this series has been one of the only shows to really not package things in a neat bow. It's not a fun musical that you can take the whole family to see. It certainly is fun, of course, and it's definitely revolutionary, but it's not a family musical, nor is it something that's easily digestible, nor can you really explain what Passing Strange is to many people, which again leaves it kind of unmarketable. And as we've termed, with shows like The Wiz and Dreamgirls, a lot of the times on Broadway it is about marketability, unfortunately. And this musical just didn't get that. So in conclusion, is this show a Black musical? Well, undeniably, yes. But it's even more than that. Charles Isherwood, a New York Times reviewer, states, quote, "But please don't call it a Broadway musical. You could scare away too many people who might actually enjoy it. Call it a rock concert with a story to tell, trimmed with a lot of great jokes, or call it a sprawling work of performance art complete with angry rants and scary drag queens. Call it whatever you want, really. I'll just call it wonderful and a welcome anomaly on Broadway, which can use all the vigorous new artistic blood it can get," end quote. To this I agree. The show is a piece of art, not just a piece of Black theater. And just as it discusses passing and identity, it should also be given the right to pass as whatever it wants to be. It is, of course, a Black musical, but it's so much more than that. It is an expression, a Black feeling, a musical journey, a surreal artistic experience. I have very little to critique about this piece because, to be honest, it is everything I have always wanted in a musical, in which I could see myself, my culture, but also I could see myself as so much more and so much less. In Passing Strange, Blackness becomes stews and our own collective stories of youth, sadness, a quest for love, a quest for the real, a connection to our past, and a question of, can history rewrite itself, or does history beg us to rewrite it? And there you have it. And a refreshing change of pace. Right when I was just starting to get nervous about Black musicals, Passing Strange came along to reassure me that art is art, and that there are some great, amazing pieces of Black art. Yes, while the show was too short-lived and received very little awards, I think it's one of the most beautiful, complex, and interesting Black, engaging, and sorrow-filled, surrealist musicals that I've ever seen. And it deserves all of those titles because it doesn't get to be put in a package box. And I think that's important to note. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching these past 6 episodes of Black musicals and what are they. This series will definitely not be ending. I'm going to keep going, but I will be taking a short break because while this series is absolutely amazing to create, it is a lot of time and work and effort to put in. Since this is the last episode, I also want to take the time to just thank everyone who has been involved in this series, who sent in videos. I want to thank the editor. I want to thank the thumbnail maker, graphic designer. I'm just so appreciative that this project really took off. It's been a lot of work, but I couldn't have done it without supporters, and that includes people who are watching the video and who subscribe to my channel. I will be back and better than ever in the next month with more videos for you on Black musicals, but also on just Black art in general. So thank you so much for watching.